we're going to be looking at what it is that you're faced with in terms of your challenges around regulatory reporting, specifically as it relates to anti-money laundering. So we're going to talk about your need to be able to monitor all your transactions and detect anything that's potentially reportable to the regulator. The presentation today, although we're going to talk about the U.S. regulator, FinCEN, in some respects, the same content and concepts really apply throughout all jurisdictions, right? There are just some slight variations here and there. And what we're going to be talking about is how you can get the reports to be automatically generated, how it is that you should have a need to be able to review and validate it. So for those of you who are doing the submissions to FinCEN, you know that there are many fields and all of them come with a number of different validations. So how is that going to be useful for you? To be able to also submit them in batches. So after you have gone through your review process, how do you submit say 50 or 100 different reports, whatever it is that you need. And then also looking at how you can get the notifications coming back from the regulator to say, hey, you have submitted this report, it has been successfully received with no errors, and it was not rejected. And you can see that within your existing system, whether it's through your workflows or whatever case management you're using, okay? So those are the items that we're going to cover. So that those are the learning objectives for today, and those are the things that we're going to be covering. So for most of you on the call, one of the things that you'd realize is that to do the reporting it can be labor intensive, and the thing is that if you are not doing it well, then there are significant penalties that your organization could be facing. And so it is a mandatory requirement. It is something that you want to be able to streamline and get it done very seamlessly. So you could have a situation where one organization could be filing thousands of these reports, whether it's the CTRs or the SARs, whether it's the threshold reporting or the suspicious activity reporting. And in what we've also been seeing in all the different surveys that are being done, all the reports coming out from industry analysts, is that there's a tremendous increase in the number of persons that are being deployed in compliance departments just to handle the sheer volume of reporting that is needed. So why it is that this is such a big challenge? A lot of you would have a situation where you have detected something that is suspicious. You have to go onto the regulator's portal to report it. But at the same time, how do you detect a suspicious transaction when you have 1 million transactions flowing through your system? How do you detect that these 100 or these 200 transactions should be reported? How do you make sure that you are detecting it and then also reporting it within the timeline that the regulator is insisting? Because in all the different jurisdictions, there are requirements that says you have X time period after which you have to report the suspicious activity. And then some of the regulatory reports, they have so many fields. How do you ensure that they're accurate? How do you ensure that it's completed? And then when you submit it, it's not being rejected all the time. That, apart from that, there's also the matter of when you think about what it is that you're submitting, oftentimes it's highly sensitive information. There are a number of other regulations that govern the privacy and the confidentiality of that information. So how do you do it in a secure manner? And the last item is, okay, so I've done that. The regulators come in, they're doing the audit. How do I prove to them that I've actually submitted the suspicious activity for this customer at this time, and you sent me confirmation that you did receive it? So it's all of those challenges. When you put it together, you realize that there's a big problem here. And of course, if you get it wrong, what happens? And I think that's one of the things that dominates the thoughts and the concerns for persons in the field and everyone that's on this call. It is, if I get this wrong, what's the implication for my organization? And you may have also been noticing that a lot of the new fines that are coming down, there are also implications for the Chief Compliance Officer, meaning that not just the organization, but individuals are now also being penalized. So those are some of the, so that makes it very personal, and it makes it a real big problem. Even you as a compliance person, to what extent do you want to take these risks? So these are just a couple of examples where TD Bank in 2013, they were fined about $52.5 million for failing to report suspicious activity. Caesar's Palace last year, they got a $9.5 million fine, and one of the items that were included in that fine was that they were not reporting suspicious activities in the casinos. So I think overall, these are big enough monies for you to be concerned about what it is that you're doing in terms of regulatory reporting. Now let's look at the volume. We looked at FinCEN sent out some reports the other day, and since 2012, which is 4 years ago or so, deposit-taking institutions submitted 1.6 million SARs to FinCEN, money services businesses. So those of you that are involved in, say, money transfers or other type of MSBs, you'll find that there's about 1.2 million that was submitted in that time. Casinos, you'll see that their numbers are also rising, and they have done about 76,000 submissions over that time period as well. And the thing is that these numbers are actually increasing. So it's not as if it is getting less burdensome, it is getting more burdensome. So if you think about it, for MSBs alone, there's a 1,000% increase in the last 3 years in terms of what has been submitted to the regulators by MSBs. So if you are falling into some of these areas, this is a challenge that you face. Then when we talk about not the complexity, but how tedious it can be to submit these reports, that's where we come into the picture. For FinCEN SAR, it can be as much as 450 different fields. In some instances, you don't have to fill out all of those because depending on the nature of your business, you may not have that information. You can always tag it as unknown. But we're talking 450 fields. On a CTR, it's almost 200 fields. And so if you're trying to do this manually, sitting down, typing this information in from spreadsheets, from faxed messages, from scanned documents, trying to do that can be a really expensive venture in terms of how many full-time employees are required to do it. So if you're approaching this manually, you're talking about just one report could take over an hour, it could take hours depending on the complexity. So let's go back and see how much this is really costing you. If you are doing, say, 150 reports in a week, and let's be conservative and say it's going to take you 1.5 hours to do a single report, you're looking at 225 hours a week to submit reports. That's actually the same as 6 full-time employees, right? And the thing is that the regulations keep on changing all the time, and the reporting requirements are getting more and more burdensome. So you have to be consistent and think about what is the true cost of compliance. So can you, and then, you know, even if you're doing this, like I spoke with a company the other day, and they were looking at what we were doing, and she said to me, Andrew, so I want to be able to print it. And I said, what do you want to print? She says, well, I want to be able, when I submit it, I want to print it. And I said, what do you want to do with that? She said, well, the truth is, when the auditors come in, I want to be able to show them that I actually submitted it. And I said, but if you're doing it in a system, shouldn't you just have it in the system anyway? You should be able to go into the system and search and say, yeah, these are all the report, all the submissions that I made for company A. You should be able to see all of those and prove when you submitted them. You should be able to give evidence that, hey, I got the confirmation number coming back. I should be able to see all of that. And if it is that you're doing that, then again, You don't have to be involved in all of the manual remediation work and all the manual activity. So one of the things that Forbes was saying is that truly financial institutions today, they really have to make sure that their AML and sanction screening solutions, to be able to support the regulatory requirements, you must have strong case management and robust workflow and generate reports. So in other words, you have to be able to get away from all of these different manual activities that are very, very tedious to work with. So just to recap a little bit on this, it's tedious, takes a long time, it is costly. Sometimes I don't think compliance departments are recognizing how costly it is because they're not calculating, you know, the full-time employee hours, how many full-time employees are involved in doing this on an ongoing basis. And I think they also compare it and say, well, I could put 10 people at it. It's never going to be anything close to the amount of money that I would have to pay if I'm being sanctioned or fined by the regulator. So one of the things that you want to make sure is that when you're looking at these solutions, not only is it that it is detecting the suspicious activity, but it's going to make sure that the reporting is seamless and that you can be able to generate all the reports all the way through the system. So at the end of this, what I'm also going to do is that I'm going to give you a simple scenario and just kind of walk you through how it works. For those of you that actually want to see more, what we'll be able to do is to take your information, and we can get our product people to kind of walk you through and show you an actual demo and walk you through the system. So let's talk about the solution. So we talk a lot about the problems. You know, you don't want to be fined. You don't want to go through the tedious process of doing the reports. And how do you detect suspicious activity when you are doing millions of transactions, right? So one of the things that we do in terms of an end-to-end compliance solution is that we're not just providing you with one piece of the picture. We're doing a comprehensive end-to-end, give you the full view of what is happening. And that including doing all the KYC compliance checks and monitoring, not just when you onboard a person, but on an ongoing basis. How do we evaluate that we're still KYC compliant? The sanctions list screening, whether you're using whatever research list you want to use or any combination of those lists, we can provide that as well. Now, transaction monitoring and regulatory reporting, they go hand in hand because it's the transaction monitoring that actually detects the transactions that should be reported on, say, your threshold reporting, your CTRs. And it actually pushes all that information into the reporting and allow you to just be simply just clicking through and pushing and generating those reports. In some instances, we can generate as much as 100% of all the data that is required for a CTR, and you don't necessarily have to be typing in any information. And so that's one part. The regulatory reporting that we're going to show you, as I said, this is really around the US regulations, but the way the technology is built, it is going to be able to allow us to plug in different skins and validations for other jurisdictions. So whatever you're seeing and we're talking about here in terms of the FinCEN reporting, it's the same concept that applies regardless of where you are. All right, so what are we doing here? What is this that we're doing that makes this really works very well? Everything that we're doing in this platform is really driven by analytics, and everybody talk about analytics these days, but it's really a big differentiator if you are building AML compliance on strong data analytics. And one of the things that we're able to do with that is, as I said, identify what is potentially reportable and being able to use that and pre-populate what the regulators want to be reported on. So that reduces all your time and effort. You don't have to be guessing and wondering, am I covering everything? Am I getting 100% coverage? Am I missing anything big? You know, that's the item. Am I missing anything that's going to result in a big fine for my organization? Those are a lot of the concerns that persons have. And so from there, what we also do is that we prepare all the reporting for you so that you can actually see it and say, hey, I want to submit this to the regulator. And then, of course, getting the confirmation coming back. So some of our clients, you know, they are doing thousands of reports per year across different branches, across different locations, in some instances for the MSBs across multiple stores, hundreds or thousands of different stores. And so one of the things that we've been able to do is that we've been able to cut back that time for preparation of that report from over an hour just down to like less than 10 minutes. And you know, it varies. Some reports take a little bit more than 10 minutes, you know, others, but on average it's less than 10 minutes. And that's a big cost saving for them. You know, how does the technology work? It's really quite simple. Any of you that have seen a demonstration of our technology know that we take a lot of pride in making a lot of complex things really look simple. So that's one of the hallmarks of everything that we have done. So we are going through and we are monitoring all your transactions. So note that I didn't say some of your transactions, all of your transactions. And we have a whole suite of different analytics that you should be running according to your industry. So if you're in banking, then there's a set of analytics that will detect suspicious activity, will detect threshold type activity, and will generate those reports. If you're in the casino business, same thing. If you're in MSBs, same thing, or whatever industry it is that you're in. So the analytics are there that will generate all of these things. Then after we detect that something is reportable, we trigger different alerts. So we can generate an alert. That alert will now be sent to whomever you want it to be sent to. It could be sent back to someone in the branch, or it could be sent to head office for them to do all the reporting. The alerts are simple alerts in your email, or you can get a text message, or you can get a pop-up on your browser. So in a number of different ways we can trigger the alerts. When that happens, another thing that we're doing too is that, especially for the suspicious activity reporting, we allow you to upload all the attachments, put your comments in. We do things like what are the indicators. So for example, if we generated something and you looked at it and you said, well, this is a false positive, that indicator goes back into us learning and refining the analytics so that you don't get those coming back through in the future, right? And then let's say that there are other instances where you have to create a full-blown case for investigation. What we do in those situations are allow you to escalate it from just an alert to a full-blown case for investigation, and we can attach all different types of alerts into the case and do a broader type of an investigation. So that's kind of how it works, very simple. Another thing that we do is that you want to make sure that they're accurate, because if you are doing that and you send it to the regulator and it's missing information and all the validation is not right or anything like that, then now you're going to have problems. So what we're doing is that we are performing all the validation, and we do some additional validation that we think is that's really important, and so we pre-populate all the information doing that. So, and this is all done by just doing a simple click. So we'll return an alert and say we have picked up five transactions by customer Andrew Simpson, and we notice that he's structuring transactions at different branches. And so when we accumulate it all together, we realize that it is reportable under the threshold type reporting, and we might also say, hey, by the way, we should be submitting this as a SAR as well. Then in that case, everything is pre-populated and you just need to go ahead and submit it. We're also checking to see if there's missing information or if there's any errors in terms of the data. The quality of the data might be poor, so you might have to make some cleaning up of your data before you submit it. So the way that this is also working too is that everything is done on a workflow. So we're automating the business process. So from detection to review to submission to validation, all of that is done on a workflow, and you can decide how you want to handle that. You can also put in things like the deadline for you to submit it to another level or another stage in the workflow. You can have those as well. So again, what we're trying to do is that we're just trying to make it really simple. So we are doing the electronic submission. We can also do batches. So let's say that I have a team of people that's doing the review of the reporting. They can send all of them to me for final review. Say I'm the head of compliance or something like that, or I am responsible for those reporting. I can go through, examine all of them, click on an entire batch of 10 or 20, 50, whatever, and then push all of those through and get the acknowledgement coming back from the regulator. And I'm also able to track everything in my workflow. And by doing that, then I create this audit trail that shows when it was detected, who went ahead and said it should be submitted, who touched it after that, who added additional comments, who did the final submission to the regulator, when did I get it back in terms of confirmation coming back from the regulator. And so all of that is there. So if you ever get audited, it's very easy for you to go into the system and just bring up all of that and prove that you have done everything that you should be doing. So again, we'll encourage you guys to go ahead and ask questions. I've gotten a couple of questions already, and I'm just going to answer those a little bit. But please go ahead and submit your questions so that we can have more questions. So one of the questions that I have here is, does the solution offer reports to other regulatory bodies? I guess you're asking outside of what I've been talking about. Yes. So, for example, we have customers that are looking at implementing this in other jurisdictions. So, for example, Australia, you have Austrac, or in Canada, you have the FinTrack guys in Canada as well. So, all we're doing in the technology is that it's just a different skin, a different set of validations, and everything else remains the same. What we're also able to do is that in some jurisdictions you might find that there are certain type of analytics that we need to implement in that jurisdiction for the suspicious activity that's important for that regulator based on the guidelines. So we may have some scenarios that we're testing in one jurisdiction that is not in another. So I hope that answers the question. All right, so what's the difference? You know, it's really efficiency, I think, is a big thing, and also just your head count. You just don't want to have a whole bunch of people, all they're doing is this tedious task of filling out these reports for the regulator every day. So you're going to end up in a situation where the data analytics presents a very, very strong value proposition, because to me, if it is that I can't look at millions of transactions and detect what is suspicious and what is potentially reportable, then that is a big, big part of what my obligations are that I cannot fulfill. So I think that that's a big part of it. Now, after you've detected it, yes, great, but what are you doing with it? By being able to pre-populate it and everything, then I'm reducing things from hours to minutes, right? And that's very important for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through a scenario where, you know, we're going to walk through step by step, a scenario where we say, okay, this has happened in a bank, and these are all the things that are being triggered, and then from there show you how the system is going to be interacting. All right? So let's say that, and we don't want to just go with the, you know, the normal situation or normal scenario. Let's start to create something really cool here. So Simon is being added as a joint account holder on Miriam's account. So Miriam is there. She's a really good customer. We have never had any problems with her before, and all of a sudden we see Simon coming on as a joint account holder. That in itself is not a problem. That's fine. But immediately after Simon was added, we start seeing a whole bunch of her wire transfer activity now has spiked. Now, this is a lady, if you look at her account before, you realize that she never did wire transfers, and even then the volume, the amount of money and the frequencies that you're seeing on the account now becomes an outlier based on how the account is normally operated. So when we see that, coupled with the fact that the wire transfers are going to high risk jurisdictions, we say, hey, there's a potential issue there, and we flag these transactions as potentially suspicious. right? So when that happens, we send an alert and it goes to a compliance analyst. So Francis is the compliance analyst. Um, Francis then comes in and says, hey, I've gotten an alert. I click on it, open it, taking a look at it. We provide all the information. So this is one of the things too, is that when you send an alert around suspicious activity, you have to try and present everything on one screen that the person can look at it and say, all right, yeah, this makes sense, or no, that's a false positive, as much as you can, because there are certain things that computers are great at, but guess what? There are certain things that that human brains do normally. Like a 3-year-old could do something and a computer might take forever to do the same thing. So you have to pair the computer for its ability to look at large volumes of data and present you with information, and then use that customer's brain or that user, use their brain to look at the context and make a decision quickly. So we're trying to bring enough information to the screen that the person can make a decision. So Francis is there, gets the alert, clicks on the browser, brings up the application, sees what is going on. When that happens, she reviews the alert, and then she determines that based on all the information provided, we believe that a SAR should be filed. But then she goes back through, and then she says, hey, hold on, let's bring up Simon's account number. When we brought it up, you realize that, hey, we found a previous filing that was done within the last 30 days. Now, this is important because regulators often say, hey, if you submit a SAR on a customer within the last 30 days, or sometimes it's 120 days, and you now want to submit a new one, then what you should be doing is that you should be bringing up the previous SAR and edit it and resubmit it. So those are all the tedious, intricacies of the reporting that's being handled by the system. Then after we do that, you amend the report, put additional narrative in, include additional suspicious activity, and then validate again. So once Francis goes through, validate all the information, system says there are no errors, it's good for submission. Once that happens, then our workflow can do something else. It can go beyond that and say, yes, Francis is doing great work, but we want to go a little bit further. What we want to do is that we want to have another person, in this case, Claire, another person that's going to receive all of these reports that are ready for submission and do a final validation and do the actual submission to the regulator. So Claire logs in and, of course, sees the SARs that have been completed from Francis, but also is seeing SARs that have been completed by other people. So there you can have a number of persons in the compliance department doing their investigations, doing their preparation of the SARs, and it comes to Claire for final submission. Claire looks at all of them and said, hey, all these 5, they're good. Click on all 5 and says, submit that batch. And when that batch is submitted to the regulator, then the regulator, depending on how it is configured, because look, in some jurisdictions, you don't have that situation where the regulatory report is being connected and going directly to the regulator. It's like an electronic file that you have to send. In other instances, it's a printed report that you have to send. But we're hoping that, as time goes on, that all the regulators would be in a situation where they're receiving electronic submissions, because that is the most efficient thing that they could be doing. Regardless, we can facilitate whatever submission needs to be done. So Claire goes through, sends in her 5 SARs, gets a validation coming back from the regulator saying, hey, this is good. And what we do is that based on the response from the regulator, we move all these 5 SARs into a new state in our workflow to say acknowledged as okay. So now we have evidence to show that we sent it, we received acknowledgement, and it is filed with the regulator. All right? And then on top of that, what you can also do is that if you want, you can configure it to just send the acknowledgement again to prove that Claire, you sent through 5, they were all acknowledged, they came back from the regulator as being acknowledged okay, and now they're fine. So I hope that kind of makes sense. We didn't want to create a scenario that is too complicated, but it is a suspicious activity that was detected. A compliance analyst is able to make a quick decision about the item, make sure everything is filled out, submit it, move it along in the workflow. A compliance manager logs in, sees all the reports, make a batch submission, gets verification coming back from the regulator, and then all is good. Right? So that's kind of like how the process works. It's not complicated, it's really quite straightforward. So before I get into the big benefits, let's take a few more questions. It says, how does the system address information missing from the core systems which are required fields in the report? All right, so what that means is, and my interpretation of your question, by the way, it means what happens if my core system does not have some of the key information that the regulators are asking for, or it's not stored in my system, but it might be in some other document? Well, remember that we will take as much information as your core systems have and pre-populate the required fields for the regulatory report. If you are missing certain fields, when you press validate in our system, or you decide to validate before submission, and you have to validate before submission, we are actually going through and checking all the information. And if it's missing anything, we'll tell you field number 75 is missing, it's too long, it's too short, it's not the right format, or it's missing altogether, things like that, or that date doesn't make sense, or that the numeric field has wrong information in there. So we'll tell you all of that, and then in the system you can actually go and edit that information and put correct information in there. Unless you do that, you'll never be able to submit the report. So there's a gate right there, a quality check right there that the system is doing, making sure that everything is validated before submission. I hope that answers the question. There's another one here. Let's see. It says, is there a limit to how many reports can be filed in a batch? We don't have a limit. So as in our system, if you have 100 or 200 or whatever you want to submit at the same time, you can just go ahead and submit them. There's no limitation on our side. Then it says, there's another one, I think I talked about this a little bit. What percentage of reporting fields can the solution auto-populate? It can be as high as 100% depending on what is available. So the CTRs are, the threshold type reporting is relatively straightforward. When you look at suspicious activity reports, it depends on how much of that information is readily available. And all of this too is configurable. So we can actually look at, when we create your suspicious activity report, coming back into the system, we are tagging and flagging this to what the regulator is looking for. And if there are certain things that's missing, of course, when you bring it up, it will tell you that it's missing that information, and then you have to fill it out. So in some instances, we can do 100%. In other instances, you might find that there's some information that is required or not correct or outdated or things like that, and then you'd have to update that information yourself. But maybe as low, I asked Andre this morning, who's the product manager, and he said it's probably about as low as 60% and as high as 100%. All right? And how does this is another one, how does the transaction monitoring capability differ from the same feature in similar solutions? Okay. The transaction monitoring facility within the platform is what feeds all the regulatory reporting. And what we do is that we're primarily a data analytics company. That's our genesis. That's where we started. And based on that, the platform comes with a highly sophisticated analytics engine. And based on that, we're able to do a lot more in terms of analytics, in terms of detecting suspicious activity. There's 20 odd years of experience in doing that. And that's one of the things I would say, the sophistication of the analytics engine plus the years of experience in looking for suspicious activity, not just in financial institutions, but a number of different industries. We put all of that together. I think that probably puts us, give us some competitive advantage. So what do you get? Main thing here is that you're looking at time and cost savings, but clear and comprehensive insights into AML risks. So within the platform, we also do some things that we'll also give you dashboards and visualizations that will show you, how your submissions are working, how efficient the process is working, how many of you submitted this month versus last month, your rejection rate if there is any, so you get those operational efficiencies. But more importantly, I think that you then now know that in a quite a significant way, a lot of your suspicious activity is going to be automated. The suspicious activity detection and reporting is going to be automated end-to-end, right? The audit trail is there, so you can prove that you're doing the due diligence, you can prove that you're doing the work, and that's the main thing, is that when the regulators come in, you need to be able to prove that you're doing what you should be doing. And getting the confirmations back from the regulator, I think is really a big thing. All in all, the idea is for you not to be chasing compliance, but for you to be ahead in what it is that you're trying to do. So one of the things that we'd like to do is that in a call to action, if it is that you're interested in getting a closer view on this, looking closer at what we have done with regulatory reporting, again, or what we're trying to do, our vision for this module within our AML platform is to take something that can be rather complex and making it really simple, point, click, drag, and getting everything done very efficiently. So if you want to see that, just reach out to us, send an email, and we'll get our product people scheduled to walk you through and show you what the application actually looks like.